You have reached the deepest depths of the internet. If it is greatness you seek, you've come to the wrong show. If it's about not wasting time, don't worry, you're never going to get your time back. If it's knowledge you seek, just be aware, any knowledge gained here is going to be minuscule. So now it's time for Accost the Field with Tony Gerdeman on the Ozone Radio Network.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Accost the Field. I am Tony Gerdeman, and here with me, as always, is Tom Orr. Tom, how are you doing?
Just want to get everyone used to that. You're going to hear it a couple times on Saturday. Just want to let you know it's coming. So get ready for your lion roars. I'll just play those periodically throughout the show, and and I will keep playing them every week until you have given us a 5-star review on iTunes. So if you hear lion roars, just know it's because we know you have not given us a 5-star review.
And what does that lion roar sound like again?
The beatings will continue until morale improves.
Normally this would just be like an hour and 45 minutes, but it's going to be like 4 hours because 2 hours of it is the lion roar.
Yeah, it is like, that is like the boomer sooner of in-stadium sound effects, where it's like, it's annoying, but the fact that they do it so much makes it so much more annoying. It's really fantastic. One of those great college football things.
You know, I'm a guy who's in the press box. I prefer to have the windows open so that we can hear the crowd and hear what's going on. At Penn State, I don't always prefer that, because when you're closed in like that, you don't necessarily hear, what is it? Thank you.
You're welcome. We should treat this like the Slapsgiving episode of How I Met Your Mother, where I will tell you we're going to do it 5 times during the show. You've heard it 3. But the anticipation of the last 2 is going to just absolutely drive you insane for the rest of the hour or 2 that we're going to talk. So you have that to look forward to, which is nice.
Before we get to Penn State, there's a very important game to talk about that happened last week, which was the 49-6 win over Tulane. And if you'd want to hear us talk about that in any type of detail, as much detail as we can speak in any way, you can go ahead and listen to last week's the instant reaction from Sunday, early Sunday morning, late Saturday night following the Tulane game. So go find that one, and if you are downloading this show, you probably already have it. Tom, I barely even remember the game because it was like just sort of a like a road sign on the way towards where you're supposed to be going. So the best thing and the worst thing we saw, the best thing that I saw was, I think once again, it's Dwayne Haskins and just the accuracy, 21 for 24 passing, incomplete control, just a calm demeanor, all in one half. We kind of assumed they were going to try to get his stats in as quickly as possible and then shut him down. So for me, he was the best thing that I saw. I saw some other good things, but I can't really remember them right now. Like Paris Campbell, of course. That was 8 catches, 147 yards, 2 touchdowns, all career highs, all happened in 2 quarters. And actually, Tom, the best thing that I saw, I remember now, was Paris Campbell catching a deep pass. Now, it almost wasn't a catch. And I'm sure as it's hitting his hands and leaving his hands, he's thinking like, oh, crap, if I don't catch this, then this is all people are going to talk about. But he was able to bring it in. So for me, the best thing I saw was a deep completion to Paris Campbell.
Yeah, I would have to go with Dwayne Haskins as well. I mean, yes, it's Tulane. Yes, whatever. They've played 4 teams, and 3 of them have been kind of garbage. But Ohio State has played garbage teams before in the past, earlier in their history, and they've never had a quarterback that has done the stuff that Dwayne Haskins is doing right now. I wrote an article Saturday night and just gave a bunch of little like nuggets. Like, hey, in a quarter and a half on Saturday, he had more passing yards than Ohio State had in any of the last 6 games last season. That was in a quarter and a half. And then he threw more. Then he had another long touchdown drive after that. He had 304 yards in the first half, we asked an Ohio State spokesman on Monday if he happened to know if that was a record for one half. He didn't know, but we can at some point when we have time. Maybe this will be on the drive to Penn State. We'll have time to go through the box scores from the previous 29 300-yard passing performances from Ohio State quarterbacks. But I mean, unless Art Schlichter did it in 1981 or maybe Joe Germain in 1997 at Penn State, I think there's a decent chance that that's a record for one half for a quarterback. That comes 2 weeks after he set a record for, or the third most accurate passing performance in Ohio State history. The numbers, like, you don't have to like come up with cute little numbers. Like, all of the numbers are like, wow, what is, like, you have never seen an Ohio State quarterback playing like this before. So, it remains to be seen whether it happens again this Saturday. That's kind of the last test I think he needs to pass before, I'm willing to jump completely on the bandwagon with both feet. But it is looking pretty darn good so far.
Yeah, the other game that I would take a look at, and we talked about this during the game, would be the 89 Minnesota game with Greg Fry, and that comeback in the second half, where he threw for over 300 yards, and I bet he was pretty close to 300 yards in the second half. The Dwayne Haskins thing, I tweeted out this stat today, that he's had 2 games of over 20 completions and just 3 incompletions. And he's the only quarterback in Ohio State history to do it once, and he's done it twice in his last 2 home starts. One of those in a constant downpour. So we're seeing, Ohio State just graduated arguably their greatest quarterback ever, and Dwayne Haskins is making people forget him pretty quickly. Now, he's not making Urban Meyer forget him, but the fan base is now seeing an Ohio State offense that they think, like, you know what, this, and it's what we've talked about many other shows. You've got to get a quarterback who can take you over the top and who can complete passes against Alabama. And he sure looks like a guy who can, provided the receivers can do their part as well and the offensive line does their part. But at least as a quarterback, as a passer, the Buckeyes have somebody now that, I've never seen them have before.
Yeah, I mean, there's always another giant to slay down the road. There's always, well, let's see if he can do it against whoever's up next, and no matter how good Ohio State looks during any given week, there's always, but they're not as good as Alabama. Like, there is a certain point at which you kind of just have to enjoy what's going on in front of you. That if your measuring stick is, they might not be as good as Alabama, then no one outside of Alabama is going to ever enjoy any part of a football season. And if you look at Nick Saban, it doesn't look like he's enjoying his season very much either. So, I mean, then no one's having fun. So that's probably not a great way to live.
It's a good waste of college football, which is it's all fun. And to not have fun during college football season when you look forward to it 9 months out of the year seems kind of a waste of time. Speaking of waste of times, let's continue to talk about this Tulane game. What was the worst thing you saw?
Well, you almost made Urban Meyer cry during the Monday press conference, so I'll leave that part for you. So, let's see, what else other than that? I mean, the running game was not particularly inspired on Saturday. Yeah. And, I mean, Urban said after the game that they were kind of making a dedicated effort to stop the run and bringing safeties up to stop the running game, which then opened up things downfield. So, yeah, I mean, that was true. If you went back and watched, that was true in an awful lot of cases. But you would still hope that Ohio State, even if Tulane was trying to stop them from running the ball, you would certainly hope that Ohio State could run more effectively than they did. I think they ended up around 4 yards per carry, which is, whatever. That's fine. It's not a disaster, but it's not real inspiring. And, at a certain point, you would have expected them to do more on the ground that they did, given the talent they have. I mean, Mike Weber didn't play the whole game because he got hurt partway through, but J.K. Dobbins is infinitely better than anyone on Tulane's team. The Ohio State offensive line is significantly better than the Tulane defensive line. You should be able to run the ball. They should be breaking some long runs against that defense, and they weren't. So that's a little bit of a concern. the backups not putting any points on the board until the very, very end of the second half. That was, that you would prefer to see them score once or twice against Tulane. I mean, that's a team that, again, you should be able to move the ball on at least a little bit as even as backups. But that's pretty nitpicky. But as we said, if you did not watch the Urban Meyer press conference on Monday, Gerd asked Urban Meyer a question that left him. I mean, I don't want to say gobsmacked, but it was like, really? Is that true? Well, go ahead and tell your story, Gerd.
Well, yeah, I asked him what his the Ohio State, the starting three linebackers, Tuff Borland, Malik Harrison, and Pete Werner, all went with 0 tackles against Tulane. None of them recorded a single tackle. So I asked Urban Meyer, thinking that he knew this, and I was, what goes through your mind when you hear that your linebackers, your starting linebackers, didn't record a single tackle, and that was obviously the first that he had heard of that stat, of that little note, and he was like, are you sure? And then he's like, well, Malik Harrison's played well. I know he was his champion, and he was just befuddled by it. And then at the end, he was basically like, that's a great question. I don't know. And then I was so befuddled by his befuddlement, I didn't even have like a follow-up. I was just like, okay, thanks. Because he was caught off guard by it, clearly. And I think I've got down in the rundown, let's try to figure out later on, let's try to figure out how this can happen and not be so bad. And we can do that right now, because there are acceptable reasons for like a linebacker not getting a tackle. Like Tuff Borland, all of the guys, the starters, pretty much played a half, maybe a little bit more into the third quarter. But Tuff Borland split time with Baron Browning. Pete Werner is out on the edge where the play may never come your way. Malik Harrison, he should have some tackles, but in this option offense, it's you have to worry about your assignment and your gap, and the play may never come to you, but in the option, you have to make sure that you're where you're supposed to be. So all of these things could contribute. But then you look at the backups, and the backups are making tackles. Dante Booker was a player of the game with 4 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and a sack, and he was at the SAM. But then also Tulane is running the ball more in the second half because they just want to get out of town. So there's more opportunities to make tackles. But still, it's not a good stat. And then as we were talking after interviews Tuesday, I wonder what the conversation was like with Urban Meyer to Greg Schiano to Bill Davis, because that the conversation didn't end between, after that question. That wasn't the end of the conversation. He went back and wants to know, what's going on there and like, why did this happen? Is it okay that it happened? And I'll also mention, Dante Booker graded out a champion in that game. Malik Harrison has graded out a champion against Rutgers and TCU. Those are the only 2 linebackers who have graded out as champions this season. So when Urban Meyer says they're playing pretty well, and Greg Schiano says, I think they're playing pretty well, which they have both said, what is the difference between pretty well and champion? Can you be pretty well and not be grading out a champion? So I think there's clearly issues, and we've been talking about it nonstop on shows since, the end of last season, basically. So there is something to that stat, but maybe it's not as terrible as it sounds, but it's still pretty bad.
It's not great. And, in a vacuum, I think it would be pretty easy to dismiss it as, it's kind of a fluky thing. And, it could be any of the reasons you mentioned that, these things happen. It's a weird statistical fluke, and you kind of dismiss it and move on. But, not in a vacuum. I mean, you mentioned 2 linebackers all season who've graded out as champions. That tells you that they're, internally they're not thrilled with it. And they can, he can come out and put a little bit of a happy face on it. And I think that Urban Meyer in the past has talked up how well the wide receivers are playing at a time that, people maybe last year were kind of going, really? I mean, these wide receivers, so if you're not grading out a champion, I think that kind of tells you something. So and it tells you, I think, what your eyes have been telling you, which is the linebacker play is not where it needs to be for this team to get to where it wants to get at the end of the year. That doesn't mean that they can't get there. There's a lot of season left, and these are all talented players, and they're playing behind a defensive line that's a pretty strong defensive line that should be able to keep offensive linemen, keep them clean, keep offensive linemen off of them. So they should be able to make plays. But this is 2 years in a row that you've been able to watch the linebacker play and go, it doesn't really look right. It is not up to the standard of a lot of the other units on the team. And 9 units strong is one of the mantras. That was one of the things that they had on the video board at the WAC tonight, Tuesday night, as we were doing interviews. They had different video messages, and one of the messages is 9 units strong. The linebackers are one of those 9 units, and I think it's probably fairly safe to say the linebackers are one of the weaker of those 9 units right now, and that has to be a little bit of a concern.
Yeah, and just looking back at last year's Penn State game, they held the Nittany Lions to 91 yards rushing. And that was 3 straight games of holding an opponent to under 100 yards. So you think they turned it around, the defense have turned it around, the linebackers have turned it around, and then they go to Iowa. And you realize, wow, who knows? Don't even try to figure it out. Getting back to the rushing against Tulane, the Buckeyes averaged 3.97 yards per carry. That was the first time they had been under 4 yards per carry in a game since 31-0 against Clemson. And Urban Meyer said the shutout would never happen again, but obviously he didn't mention the under 4 yards per carry, which maybe he should have, and then maybe they'd run the ball a little bit better. But it's hey, Tom, we know it's not his fault the Buckeyes aren't running the ball well. It's Ryan Day's and it's Kevin Wilson's and it's Dwayne Haskins.
I mean, Urban Meyer has taken his hands kind of off the offense for now, so it's not his fault. This is one of these "don't blame me, I voted for Kodos" things. Like, nope, sorry, can't blame me now. I do have some extremely major breaking news for you. Very important breaking news. Going back through the archives on OhioStateBuckeyes.com, because you were talking for quite a while, in 1989. Greg Fry did throw for more than 304 yards in the second half of the 1989 Minnesota game, because he threw for 362 yards in the entire game. 35 of those were in the first half. So 327 yards in the second half against Minnesota in 1989. So Dwayne Haskins did not set a single half passing record. It may have been, Greg Fry might not have been the only person who did it, but Greg Fry did have 327 yards in the second half against Minnesota. So only, 29, I can do math, 29 years after it happens, we have breaking news here on the podcast. In my defense, there were no podcasts in 1989 where we could have reported this. So,
right, and we would have talked about it for sure. I watched that. See, this is how I remember it. I remember, and I don't know if this is accurate, and I'll tell you why. I remember we were watching the game, and then it was, such a blowout, we turned it off. And then you turn it back on at the end, you say they win. And then back then, the games would be on Sunday morning on PBS, where we lived. And that's the way it was around other places, whether it'd be like 11 o'clock Saturday night, you'd be able to watch the replay. So that's what we would have to do. Now, the reason I'm not sure if that's entirely accurate is because I know that also happened with the Frank Reich game with the Bills and the Oilers, where we were watching it and it got ugly pretty quickly. And I know this for a fact. Grease was on, so we started watching that instead because everybody loves Grease. And then you switch back and you're like, after Grease, like, well, let's see what the football game is doing. And then you see like the Bills had come back and a miraculous comeback for the ages. But we were busy, too busy watching Grease, which was probably like the 4th or 5th time as, I don't know, what was I, 11 years old, then 10 years old that I had seen Grease. I was raised by a single mother. Yes. Why? Why do you ask?
I mean, in your defense, the Bills Oilers game did not have any flying cars at the end, so I mean, you may have made a good choice. Well, as soon as you said Frank Reich game, my mind, since this is a college football podcast, immediately jumped to the fact that Frank Reich also led one of the biggest, I think it was at the time, the biggest comeback in NCAA history as well. I think it was Maryland over Miami. Does that sound right? In the early 80s, he was a quarterback from Maryland, and they came from, I think, 31 points down to win that game, and that was at the time an NCAA record. I think that the Minnesota Texas Tech bowl game that got Glenn Mason fired may have broken that record. There was that one, and then there was a Northwestern Michigan State game, I think, too, that might have beaten that Frank Reich comeback. But yeah, a 31-point comeback in college and I think that was 35-3, so a 32-point comeback in the NFL. That's pretty good. Why isn't he in the Hall of Fame instead of Jim Kelly? That's my question.
Yeah. Why don't they make the entire plane out of Frank Reich in the second half?
Maybe they would have won a Super Bowl, huh? Think of that, smart guy.
All right, let's talk about this upcoming week. We know that Nick Bosa will not play. Urban Meyer said on Monday he's still a few weeks away. Nick Bosa's dad, however, said he'd be reevaluated in November. I don't know that Nick Bosa is even back in Columbus yet. That might be a question for Urban tomorrow. And so, which leads to speculation, is he even going to return? And I believe that's one of the listener questions, so we can save that for then. But so Nick Bosa's out. Mike Weber will play. He had the foot strain on Saturday, but as I said after the game, I think he could have played if they needed him to. But if you need him to play against Tulane, then you've already lost. Robert Landers will play. That was all precautionary, I'm assuming. But Tom, we were talking, I think even before, for the pregame of Tulane, and saying, don't be surprised if Weber doesn't play. Looking back, should he have played against Tulane?
I was pretty surprised that he played. I don't, we don't know exactly what the issue was, and was it some kind of a significant knee thing or an ankle thing or something before the game? I was kind of surprised they didn't just hold him out as a precautionary thing. I mean, it seemed like Robert Landers almost certainly could have played if last week was Penn State. So if you held him out, why not hold Mike Weber out just as a precautionary thing? But I mean, he the play that he got injured on seemed like it was probably unrelated to whatever the previous issue was. He got rolled up on his ankle by a Tulane defender. So it didn't look like it was probably an aggravation of whatever the previous injury was. So, I mean, I don't think it ended up biting him, but I was a little surprised to see him out there.
He wants to play, obviously. He also now has been injured every year of his career, which we have mentioned before. And now that seems to be holding true again this year, although nothing serious, but you wonder if he knows that he needs to play through that stuff. And you can't miss games because that's what scouts see and that's what GMs see. Why didn't you play? And it was Tulane. I didn't need to. But why didn't you play? And you never want to see players take themselves out, and that's not what Mike Weber does. Other running backs have done that in the past, and they can get labeled for that. I don't think that's Weber at all. If anything, he wants the ball to maybe not too much, because that's what Tony Alford wants, but maybe to his detriment. He is not selfish, but just really wants to be involved and wants to be the guy, and is not the kind of guy that's going to sit out just because he's sore. And they'll need him this week, obviously, and we'll see how that running game goes. But Penn State, Tom, Urban Meyer says Ohio State has one rival, and that is Michigan. Every game between these two teams is played at night. It's always highly rated. Fans love it. They hate the other team. It's always the loudest game on the road for the Buckeyes. They all know about it. They all talk about it. It's an experience for everyone. So this is a rivalry game, right?
You got one more coming. Just know you got one more coming. I mean, if you this is the problem with this conversation is that if you want to define Ohio State, Michigan State as a rivalry, or Ohio State, I don't know, Illinois as a rivalry because it's for a trophy, then sure, it's a rivalry like that. But it's like if you dropped the Empire State Building in the middle of Columbus, and it's like, look at all these tall buildings. All these buildings are tall. Yes, but there's one that's like 600 feet taller than all the other ones. But yes, but they're all tall. Like the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry is so much more of a rivalry than anything else, almost in all of sports, that it's you kind of can't compare it. I mean, no one is walking around Columbus crossing P's off of signs this week. No one is jumping in Mirror Lake this week. No one is singing about not giving a damn about the whole state of Pennsylvania. I mean, the media, just look at how the media is handled this week. Michigan week, we get access to the players and coaches once. It's Monday, that's it, and you talk to Urban, you talk to some players, and that's it. You don't see him again until Saturday morning. This is handled like every other game. And yeah, it's bigger than the Rutgers game. It's bigger than the Maryland game. Yeah, absolutely it is. It's not trying to compare it to the Michigan game is, I mean, that's not a conversation that's worth having. And that's based on history. And I don't know how long this series would have to go for it to catch up to the Ohio State-Michigan series, but I think probably multiple generations, and you would have to have, I mean, like decades and decades where this game is more important every year than everything else on the schedule, and then maybe you could have that conversation. But Penn State has not been consistently good. I mean, you think of Penn State now as, oh, they're this really wonderful national powerhouse program. Penn State was crap like 3 years ago. They have not been competitive. I wrote about this on Tuesday. This series, you think about the series, you think back to the games that Ohio State has lost at Happy Valley, and you think, oh boy, Penn State's been much more competitive than Michigan, but they really haven't. I think it's 12-4 in the last 16 years in favor of Ohio State, and yeah, that's a little more competitive than the 15-2 for Ohio State and Michigan, but it's not. This is not a every year back and forth. They're 500 against each other in the last 10 years or the last 15 years. It's Ohio State has dominated this series. There isn't the history there that would make it even worth comparing to the Michigan series. So, I mean, if you want to call it a rivalry, then sure. If that makes you feel better, then sure. But if this is every bit as much of a rivalry as Michigan State or Illinois or any other team that beats Ohio State every once in a while, and that they play kind of frequently, but it's to compare it to the Michigan game is just dumb.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I wasn't listening, but yeah, I definitely agree. It's definitely a rivalry.
Did you look up some really good late '80s Ohio State stats?
There are no good late '80s Ohio State stats, man.
I got lost in the 1989 archive for a few minutes and looked at the box score for the 42-3 loss to USC, where Ohio State got the ball on the opening possession, went down the field, kicked a field goal, immediately got a turnover from an interception from Todd Marinovich, took it down into USC territory and punted from the 35-yard line, and then gave up 42 unanswered points. This is why you don't punt in plus territory, you monsters. Ohio State football coaches will never, ever learn. Do not punt from plus territory on 4th and short. Nothing good happens.
The only good stat from the late 80s Ohio State football is what shoes did they wear? Red. Like if they put shoe color in the box score, that would be about the best stat from the late 80s. The rivalry thing, the reason this game is important is because Penn State is very good. If it was Michigan State at number 9 in the country or number 8, then Michigan State would be as important as this game, or Purdue, or it's the standings that make this game. And yeah, Penn State's a big name, but there have been plenty of times where it's not. It's just another game. And James Franklin loves to say that every game is their Super Bowl, so they don't value one game over the other. So, I mean, he doesn't think it's a rivalry, so why should anybody else? But, the 2014 game, the double overtime, the 2016 loss there that, Ohio State gave away, the comeback last year, games like that create history. And so that's where we are moving forward. Now, you look back to the 2014 game where, Urban Meyer will still tell you that's, when he saw JT Barrett lead his team out there on, on one leg for overtime. And he knew then that this is the guy that's the kind of guy you want leading your program. And that's where he fell in love with JT Barrett at that point in terms of when Urban Meyer talks about his quarterbacks, arm strength is, it's like, it's like the undercoating on a new car or whatever. Yeah, sure, whatever. It's the it's the will to win, the competitiveness, the toughness, and he saw all of that in that Penn State game from JT Barrett in 2014. So far this season, what he has seen from Dwayne Haskins has been amazing passing and increased control and management of the offense. But when Urban Meyer talks about Dwayne Haskins, Tom, there's still this sense of longing for something more, and it doesn't necessarily have to be running the ball. It's showing that will to win, that leadership, that toughness that JT Barrett had. And then I think once, like, if Urban ever finally gets to see that, then he can bring in Dwayne Haskins into his heart, like he did with JT and John Simon and, Evan Spencer and guys like that, Tim Tebow, where they are now part of like this lore of players. Because right now we look at Dwayne Haskins and we see that's the best quarterback he's ever had. But yet when people tell that to Urban Meyer, like, this is the best passer you've ever had, he'll go, well, Alex Smith this and Alex Smith that. And he's just not too eager to give Dwayne Haskins too much credit yet, which is perfectly smart and perfectly fine. And even he said after the Tulane game, going home, he called Dwayne to tell him to just, be cool this week, basically, because this is an important week. So maybe this is the week where this is the game where Dwayne Haskins has his JT Barrett moment. And if so, then we really start to hear Urban Meyer go all in on him, except he doesn't want to lose him to the NFL just yet.
I'm not sure that's going to be Urban Meyer's call to make at the end of this year. If things keep going the way they are, that may not be Urban's decision to make.
Urban, how's Dwayne Haskins playing? He's trash. He's kind of trash.
Yeah, he I'm sure doesn't want to, fire up the hype machine any more than it already is in Columbus and around the program. So I think that if you see another performance from Haskins this week, if he puts up another 350 yards passing and 4 or 5 touchdowns this week against Penn State, I don't know how much more you would need to see. And I don't know if that's a realistic expectation. It might be. I mean, I'm saying 350 yards and 4 or 5 touchdowns and thinking in my head, is there a chance he'd actually do that? And I mean, yeah, he could do that. I don't know that that's what I'm expecting, but it wouldn't, if that happened, I don't think anyone would say, whoa, I didn't see that coming. And we've talked a little bit about the recalibration of expectations for an Ohio State quarterback. And, that's 350 yards and 4 touchdowns would be, that again puts him in the, top 4 or 5 performances in Ohio State history in terms of yardage. And to do it on the road at, in front of a hostile crowd like that, I think that probably would almost certainly put you in one of the, in the top 5 quarterback performances of any game all time. And it's like, yeah, I could see that happening. I know he doesn't want to, Urban Meyer doesn't want to get everyone too excited about this just yet, because his teams generally play better when people are doubting them. And, when when they start getting too puffed up, that's when Iowa happens. That's how you get in Iowa. So, because that was the week after Penn State, when everyone was talking about how great JT Barrett was and how he was 16 for 16 in the fourth quarter or whatever it was, and then they go out and throw 4 interceptions and lose by 31 points to a crappy Iowa team. So I'm sure he wants to kind of manage the expectations and manage the hype. But if you see it again this weekend, I don't know how that's really much of a conversation.
Yeah, and he is not really, even though this is going to be a new experience for him, there are bigger concerns. Like, we're all curious to see how he does, and we're not going to be surprised if he's not 25 for 28. Like if there are struggles, there should be struggles. We shouldn't be to the point where we're already like, he's thrown 3 incompletions in a row. I don't know that he is, maybe we were wrong about him. There's going to be struggles, especially in environments like this. But for me, the concerns are defensive. And, we mentioned the linebackers a little bit ago, but with what Trace McSorley and running back Miles Sanders do with the read option, and then also the RPO, the run pass option, where McSorley can either give to a running back or throw to a slot receiver going over the middle, pulling away free, or a tight end doing the same thing, almost like a pop pass. The linebackers are going to be in such conflict that, no, in a normal situation with very good linebackers, there's still going to be situations where you give up plays. Now you've got a group of linebackers who, while the coaches are saying they're playing well, they're not grading out as well as they need to. So for me, the read option with McSorley being able to keep it, he's a very good runner, averaging, I don't know, like something like, around 50 yards, 56 yards rushing per game, not unlike JT Barrett in the past, and we know how effective he was for the Ohio State running game. So with McSorley and Miles Sanders, who had 200 yards rushing against Illinois last week, and they've got the freshman Ricky Slade in there, with that and the RPO, the quick passes, Tom, I don't feel great about Ohio State's linebackers here, and that's the number one reason why I expect a bit of a shootout.
I don't know what the over-under is, but I would lean towards the over. I think there's a much better chance that Ohio State gives up 30 points than Ohio State doesn't score 24 points or something like that. I mean, if you're going to be concerned about something, I would be much more concerned about the defense holding up and keeping Penn State under control than whether or not Ohio State can score. I think Ohio State's going to score, but I think Penn State's going to score too. I mean, Miles Sanders is averaging 7 yards a carry. Trace McSorley is averaging 5.7 yards a carry. Ricky Slade's averaging 5.9 yards a carry. And, if they can run the ball, that is going to keep, first of all, that keeps the Ohio State offense off the field. But that also, that's how they want to move the ball. If you can, I think the way Ohio State beats Penn State is to control the running game, make McSorley beat you through the air. Because their wide receivers are okay, but I don't think they're up to the standards they have been in recent years. And Ohio State's corners are pretty good this year. I think I would, if it was a matter of trusting the Ohio State cornerbacks to, win 50-50 balls down the field and just keep McSorley from just being able to kind of arm punt it up there and hit some deep passes. If you can make him have to throw it to win, I think you would probably take that if you're the Ohio State defensive coaching staff. But I don't know if they're going to be able to do that. I think Penn State, even if Ohio State kind of tries to focus on stopping the run, I think Penn State might still be able to run it at least somewhat consistently.
Yeah, the over-under right now is 71. Ohio State's favored by 3.5, which puts the score around like 37-34, something of that nature. Now, when Ohio State scores 35 points or more, and I saw this on the forum, and I read it twice to validate it. I didn't necessarily go and look for the record books, but this is something that's generally in the game notes. If you wanted to correct me,
that doesn't count as a second source. Just reading the same thing twice, just so you know, journalistically.
Well, to be fair, the first one I read to myself, and then the second time I read it out loud. So if you think about it, but the Buckeyes are 342-1-1 when they score 35 or more points. That one loss was the Clemson game in 2013 when Braxton Miller was hurt but still playing, and Ohio State decided, like, you know what, let's not guard Sammy Watkins. He doesn't seem like a dangerous guy. Let's not worry about him. So that's the one loss in school history when they score 35 points or more. So, Tom, 35 points to me does not sound, it's definitely not undoable. But do you think it's likely? 34 sounds more likely to me than 35 for some reason. Once you get over that 34, then you start talking like now you're really scoring. But do you feel good about Ohio State scoring 35?
I would, if you're giving me the over-under on Ohio State points at 34.5, I'll take the over.
Okay.
I would have, I haven't nailed down a absolute prediction, but I was thinking, even before you gave me the over-under and the point spread earlier, I was thinking like 38-35, 41-35, 41-38, something in that range. I mean, if you are on blood pressure medication, go refill your prescription now, call it into the pharmacy, because it's going to be, I think it could get a little intense on Saturday night, but I would guess, I'm going to say Ohio State goes over 34.5. What about you?
Like I said today when we were at interviews, I'll take Ohio State in a shootout against just about everybody. And if Ohio State is going to have to score, say Penn State scores 35 or 34, and Ohio State has to score 35, I feel pretty good about their chances because we haven't seen this offense necessarily just go full bore for an entire game. Even the TCU game, they took a knee at the end when they could have made it 47. And Penn State's offense, meanwhile, hasn't. I don't know if they have taken any knees when they're pouring it on at the end. When it seems like they're only doing it for scoreboard purposes. So it'll be interesting to see two offenses, the top two scoring offenses in the nation. Penn State's number one, Ohio State's number two, 1 point behind them, going 4 quarters because Penn State's offense has not played 4 quarters yet. In terms of they have not played 4 good quarters in a game. And, looking back at their scores, and I should have had this pulled up, but in their game notes, looking at the scores at the half of each of their games, for the first game was Appalachian State. The score was 10-10 at the half. Against Pitt, which they won 51-6, the score was 14-6 Penn State at the half. The third game was Kent State, which they won 63-10. It was 28-10 at the half. You should be up 28-10 at least on Kent State. And then last week it was 21-17 Penn State, and Illinois even took the lead 24-21 in the third quarter before Penn State scored the last 42 points, including 35 in the fourth quarter. So my thinking is a slow start in the first half for Penn State, Tom, is going to give them one hell of a hill to climb in the second half.
It is going to give them a hill, although I don't know if they're going to freak out about it the way that a lot of teams would freak out if they fell behind, because they've been doing it all year. Like you said, they've been playing in close games. I mean, you said you gave just listed off those scores. There were a couple of those games where they scored right before the half. They scored with 8 seconds left before the half against Penn State, I think, and they scored with 30 seconds left in the first half against Pitt. So, I mean, those games were 21-10 and 7-6 right before the half. So they're not going to freak out if they get behind, which, I mean, I think it is going to be important for Ohio State to kind of keep their foot on the gas pedal. And because you can't, with as shaky as the defense has looked, and with Penn State, showing that they can, explode for points pretty quickly, you don't want to get caught from behind. But, I mean, McSorley, if you do get ahead and you can make Penn State a little more one-dimensional, I mean, I just listed off all the yards per carry, 7 yards per carry, 5.9 yards per carry, 5.7 yards per carry for guys. McSorley is completing passes right now at a 53.7% clip. That is not real good. And again, this is against crappy defenses. You're playing against, they have played against teams that are as bad or worse probably than Ohio State's competition. And, everyone's kind of poo-pooing Dwayne Haskins completing whatever it is, 70-something% of his passes. McSorley's playing against competition far worse than that and completing less than 54%. So, it's, and that's at about 7 yards per completion, give or take, or 7 yards per attempt, give or take. So he's not, throwing bombs away down the field all the time either. So if you can make them one-dimensional, whether that's getting ahead or just if Ohio State is able to really take away the run, I think that is, if there's a way that this game gets out of hand in favor of Ohio State, I don't really expect that, but if it does, that's probably the recipe to get there. Ohio State gets up by a couple scores, starts making McSorley try and throw it, and then, you get a turnover, they start, giving up a couple 3-and-outs, and all of a sudden you can kind of pull away. But I'm not completely sold on the fact that this Ohio State defense can do that.
Yeah, we'll see if they can. They're going to set out to stop the run. They did a great job of it last year. Can they do it again? And then you take your chances with Trace McSorley, who loves to throw the ball up for grabs. It's worked in the past, hasn't been working so well this year, especially without the tight end Gesicki that they had last year. And Juwan Johnson's a big receiver. They can throw it up to him, but he 3 catches a game, 12 yards a catch, 1 touchdown. KJ Hamler is maybe their big play guy, and he's got 9 catches in 4 games. So they're not really all that explosive in the passing game. So I don't know that the cornerbacks are going to be all that concerned. I think they're going to be feeling pretty good about this game. For me, it's like Urban Meyer said on Tuesday in the teleconference. Penn State's offense is Trace McSorley, and everything goes through him. And if he's on, then the receivers are going to be making plays, and if Ohio State can keep him off schedule, then the entire offense is off schedule. So you stop the run, and then you get to him when he's throwing the ball, and now you've got something. And like you said, you get a couple of series where Penn State does not convert points and Ohio State does. Now you're looking at 2 touchdown deficit or 10 points, and yeah, Penn State is used to that. But like you talked about today, and you're writing about, Urban, you can't let off the gas because what's happened in the past when they've done that.
Right. Ohio State in 2014 was up 17-0 at the beginning of the game, at halftime of that game, and ended up kind of easing off the gas, and they got a little sloppy in the second half and ended up going to overtime, and they won it in overtime and double overtime. That was the game where J.T. Barrett had the touchdown in double overtime, and then Joey Bosa had the walk-off sack where Penn State decided to put a fullback on Joey Bosa, which, let's say that's not a winning game plan, probably. And then 2016, Ohio State was up 21-7. In the second half. They were up. They've had double-digit leads in the fourth quarter of their last 2 games at Happy Valley. One of them they lost. One of them went to overtime because they kind of eased off the gas. You can't do that. Penn State, especially this year, Penn State is explosive enough on offense. They can score quickly, and your defense is shaky enough that you're going to have to keep scoring. You can't get up. You can't do what Clemson does an awful lot, which is get up 14 points and then just try and make sure you do the trestle ball thing. Make sure you run the clock, keep it moving, just get out of there with a 14-point win. You gotta score. You gotta keep scoring because Penn State can score as well. And you said Trace McSorley is the one that makes them go. Make sure you don't knock Trace McSorley out of the game because their backup quarterback is Sean Clifford from Cincinnati St. Xavier High School. On the year, he is 5 for 5 passing for 195 yards and 2 touchdowns. So he's perfect on the year, 5 for 5, and averaging just shy of 40 yards per completion. So whatever you do, don't knock Trace McSorley out of the game because you don't want to play the guy with a 559 quarterback rating.
No, that would be dumb. That would be dumb if they knocked McSorley out. The guy who gives the Buckeyes a chance to win versus the guy who is, assuredly utter doom for Ohio State. So that's a good game plan, Tom. You might want to let Urban Meyer know that when we talk to him on Wednesday. Just be like, dude, how I sprung something on him. You can spring something on him as well. I'll be like, Urban, I know the plan is to like knock Trace McSorley out of the game, but have you looked at their stats? And he'll be like, why, what do you mean? And then you'll tell him like they have the best quarterback in the world backing up McSorley, and he'll look over at Jerry Emig and be like, Jerry, is that right? And then Jerry will be like, and then it's like, well, if Tom says it's right, then obviously it is. And then you can tell him like, yeah, Urban 5 for 5, 195 yards, 2 touchdowns. And at that point, Urban's going to cut the interview short because he's going to have to go change the game plan from knock McSorley out of the game in the first quarter to make sure he stays all 4 quarters. It's like he's going to go to NFL rules, like right at the start of the game. Don't touch the quarterback.
I'm just picturing his reaction to that series of questions, just being like that Vince McMahon gif where he just looks more shocked and more amazed at every time the camera cuts back to him, and then at the end he just falls over. I mean, I think clearly, I mean, if Urban listens to the podcast, and I think that we do, then I think they'll know. They'll now they'll know that question's coming, so maybe we don't have to ask it. Maybe Urban will mention that in his opening statement on Wednesday.
Assuming we get it posted by then.
I believe in us.
We talk about the Penn State passing game, but I think the star of the show is the Ohio State passing game. Ohio State has 18 completions of over 20 yards this season, and that's basically in 8 quarters of trying. Yeah, well, let's say 9.5 quarters, most of the TCU game of trying. So that, you know what? Now that I've done the quick math with my Ohio State education, that's about 2 per quarter.
Hang on, let me open my calculator app and check the math.
Penn State, meanwhile, in 4 games has given up just 6 20-yard completions this season. Now, do you still have the app up? If you can do 6 divided by 4.
6 divided by 4, that's 1.5.
So that's I know that. I was just joking. But you're sure it's 1.5.
You didn't know that. You're not fooling anyone.
So they're giving up 1.5 per game. Ohio State is over 1.5 per quarter. And for me, this is one of those, if you can get big yards on the road, Tom, that puts you ahead of schedule. Urban said today that with the running game and what you don't want to do is get behind schedule, and that would be getting stuffed on first down or throwing an incompletion on first down, because now you are expecting 5 or 6 yards on first down. Now you've got nothing. Now you've got to speed up. You've got to get back on schedule. And so do you run it again on second down? And if you get just 3 yards, now you're even further behind schedule. So all of this tug of war between what should we do and what do we need to do goes on. But the passing game for Ohio State, if they can get big chunks, that puts them in exactly the place they want to be. And I don't really, Tom, I don't have a lot of, I shouldn't say respect for the Penn State defense, but I don't really, I haven't watched them enough to know whether they're not giving up big plays or they're just not playing teams that are capable of big plays.
I haven't watched all of their games. I've seen some of them, and they have issues on defense. I think that probably Penn State fans are going into this game with similar concerns to Ohio State fans. I mean, the back 7 in that defense is very young. They replaced basically the entire back 7. And, some of them last year, some of the guys did start games, but they weren't the main starters. I mean, they kind of rotated guys through last year and went through a lot of guys in that back 7. But it is a relatively young back 7. They are somewhat vulnerable. They've lost a couple guys to injury on that defensive front. That's a little bit concerning, because they recruit well, but they are not at the level of depth that Ohio State is. So, those injuries can really kind of come back to bite them. I think that, you mentioned Ohio State throwing for 1.5 per quarter, big plays, and Penn State giving up 1.5 per game. They're going to meet in the middle somewhere. I think Ohio State's going to be able to hit some big plays. I don't anticipate they're going to hit, 6 to 8, 20 or 30-yard plays on Saturday, but I think you can probably hit a couple of them. I think you'll probably hit, I don't know, say 4.5 is the over-under on the number of 20-plus yard plays. Are you going over or under that?
I'm going to go over that. I feel comfortable about going over that because that's part of the offense now. They are going to attack downfield, and you do have to get the defense to back off so that they can run the ball. So, I'm going over. Are you going over?
I would go over that. I mean, because you think about that as a downfield pass, but there's a whole lot of ways they can just, you hit one of those mesh routes and a guy, a defender gets picked off and an 8-yard pass turns into a 30-yard gain. You get just one of those little jet sweep kind of touch passes. I mean, those count too. So, yeah, I think I set that probably way too low. I think a more responsible over/under would probably be more like 6.5, and I might go over that too. I think they could end up in that 6 or 7 range.
The difficult math is, you said, Ohio State is accomplishing 1.5 per quarter. You said Penn State is giving up 1.5 per game, and then you said they'd meet in the middle. That that's algebra, I believe. Like if Ohio State's 20-yard receptions leave on a train at 3:30 in the afternoon, and then Penn State's 1.5 reception per game meets in Altoona, I don't. That's why I took philosophy in college rather than math, Tom.
I think I may have contradicted myself there because meeting in the middle would be necessarily less than 1.5 per quarter, which would be 6. So I guess my original over/under should stand at 4.5, and I think I'll go over that probably. But I think they are going to hit big plays. I think you're going to have you just have one bust in the secondary, and Ohio State has the receivers that can take one missed tackle or one busted coverage and very quickly turned it into a big play. You're not gonna. This is not Kent State. This is not Illinois. You're not gonna have guys who you miss a tackle and it turns into a 7-yard gain. You miss a tackle on Paris Campbell and he's giving you the peace sign at the 2-yard line. So that I think is the difference. And you have a lot of those same concerns with the Ohio State defense where a linebacker misses a run fit, and this is a team like TCU where they've got the speed, they've got the talent to make those 70-yard touchdowns instead of 13-yard gains.
And when you have a guy like Terry McLaurin out there who can block 2 guys when Paris Campbell has the ball, I mean, now the defense is really at a disadvantage. The ability for Ohio State to stretch the field in all directions, I think, is what makes me feel pretty good about their chances, although they're always favored in Happy Valley and they don't cover, and I think the 2016 game they might have been like 19-point favorites, and obviously they lost that one. There's just something to that stadium and to that game and to that environment. Maybe it's self-fulfilling, but if Ohio State is going to overcome this environment, they're going to have to run the ball. Now, I don't know how much they're going to have to run the ball, Tom, because they throw the ball so well and they're okay throwing the ball. What I'm wondering is, we talk about the Michigan game, the rivalry. Whoever runs for the most yards wins the game. I don't know that that's necessarily true in this game. For one, Penn State is probably a better running team because they have, the quarterback who can do it and the running back who can do it. But I could see, I would not be shocked if Penn State outrushes the Buckeyes, but the Buckeyes still win. I don't know, comfortably, but still come away with a win, rushing for like 170 and Penn State's at like 185 or 200 or something like that.
Yeah, if it's close like that, sure, it could happen. I mean, you can lose your, especially the total rushing yards. You could lose that if you're getting dramatically outrushed on a yards per carry basis. If you're 1 or 1.5 yards per carry less than Penn State, I think that at that point would be a concern. But especially just on a total yardage basis, like, yeah, absolutely, that could happen. You can either get outrushed on a total yardage basis, or you could do something real dumb on special teams or have a penalty that extends a Penn State drive or something like that. I mean, Ohio State's been pretty penalized this year, pretty heavily penalized. So that's something that you've been able to get away with because you've been 40 points better than most of the teams you've played. But that's not going to be the case on Saturday. So they can do it without outrushing Penn State, but you can't get a punt blocked, you can't get a field goal blocked in returns, you can't. I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff that, as long as they don't do anything real dumb somewhere else, you can get away with getting outrushed and win. But there's your margin for error gets a lot smaller at that point.
Mm-hmm. So Tuesday we talked to Kevin Wilson, Alex Grinch, Michael Jordan, Thayer Munford, Dwayne Haskins, Pete Werner, and Tuff Borland. You were with Kevin Wilson and Dwayne Haskins, is that correct?
Yes, and Michael Jordan as well.
And what did Dwayne Haskins have to say? Anything important?
He honestly, my biggest takeaway from Dwayne Haskins was his demeanor, which was, I don't know if he's kind of putting on the, I'm not sweating it kind of face, or if he's really just not, he seemed very relaxed. He didn't seem jittery. His body language was very, everything's under control. So that was kind of my big takeaway from him. People asked about, he made the trip in 2016, obviously didn't play. That was his redshirt year, but he's been there. He's seen the atmosphere. He knows what he's getting into. Said all the right things about Penn State having a good defense and being a good team. Nothing real earth-shattering there. Michael Jordan was asked about the low snaps against TCU. He said that was kind of a function of basically what we had talked about on the podcast after that game, which was you're in a rush to snap it and get yourself up into your pass set or up into your run block because you have a very good, fast, strong, talented player on the other side of the line in a way that you don't necessarily against Rutgers or Oregon State or Tulane. So, he said, he knew it was an issue. He said he spent a lot of time working on that the week after the TCU game, but given the nature of what he said was the cause of it, which is, hey, the guy across the line from me is much better, I don't think you can pronounce that completely, that issue completely cured until you see him do it against a good team like Penn State, who has a pretty good defensive line as well. Haskins, for his part on the snaps, was asked about it. He said, he talked to Jordan about it. Wasn't a big deal. It's not throwing him off, basically, was his take on it. He wasn't too worried about it. You want him to be good, but it was not anything that he made a big deal about. And Kevin Wilson was kind of on the same page. He said basically you can't simulate having a big, fast, angry guy who wants to hurt you across the line during practice. So you can snap him during practice and snap him as many times as you want and have him look good. But when there's a big, fast, angry guy right across, 18 inches away from you across that football, that's something that you can't necessarily simulate during practice. You got to see it during a game.
And I wonder, will he see that in a game this week as well? And will the snaps once again become errant? But we will see. I think they're all confident that he put the work in, and Urban Meyer was confident and was pleased with the work that he did put in. So I talked to Thayer Munford, Pete Werner, Alex Grinch. We think about this game and we recall the 2016 game where Isaiah Prince was a true sophomore starting on the road and things did not go well. Thayer Munford is a true sophomore, and now the Buckeyes are going on the road to Happy Valley. And he knows what Isaiah Prince went through because, he's talked with Isaiah, and they've had discussions about it. But interestingly, Thayer Munford was also at that game on a recruiting visit to Penn State. Now, he went there to watch Ohio State, but he saw exactly what, Isaiah Prince went through, and this, I guess you could call it a collapse, but it was interesting. He was asked what he wore, and he wore a black coat and a hoodie to the whiteout, which should give you an idea of which way he was leaning. He wasn't going to take part in a whiteout against Ohio State. The when we look at Penn State's offense, and this was talking to Alex Grinch and Pete Werner, we look at Penn State's offense. The second half scoring is where that's where they do all of their damage basically. So I asked them both, what is the difference between the first half and the second half? And what Pete Werner said was basically like they're just relentless. They just keep doing it, and eventually the defenses can't keep up. They collapse. And Alex Grinch said similar. They don't really do anything different. They just keep doing it. And I think that's a good thing for Ohio State. If they're able to stop them in the first half, they are more likely to also be able to stop them in the second half because they rotate their defensive line. They do rotate the linebackers a little bit. The cornerbacks rotate. So this is a defense with depth, and it won't wear down like other defenses Penn State has faced. So if they are able to slow down the Penn State offense in the first half, Tom, the way they rotate and the depth that they have would lead you to believe that they're going to have a more than fighting shot of slowing down the Penn State offense in the second half as well.
I mean, that's true. Because, you look at the teams that Penn State has played so far. Illinois, Kent State, Appalachian State, Pitt. None of those schools recruit anywhere close to the level that Ohio State does, for their starters. And then there's a much steeper drop-off to the second half. So, we've talked about this in any number of contexts before with the wide receivers, with the cornerbacks, with the defensive line. That rotation really does make a difference over the course of a game. And so you are not going to see that big jump in fatigue for the opponent for Penn State this week, because Ohio State is going to be able to kind of go man for man with them, if not more. If you look back at last year's game, it certainly seemed like Ohio State was wearing down the Penn State offensive line last year, where late in that game, as Ohio State was mounting that comeback, all of a sudden you had defensive linemen all over the place because they were rotating that defensive line, staying fresh, and then all of a sudden you got Sam Hubbard shooting in there around a tired Penn State lineman, and meeting McSorley and Saquon Barkley right at that mesh point on the zone read and tackling them both. That's where you kind of saw that last year, and I think that Penn State is probably getting closer to Ohio State in terms of depth, in terms of quality, in terms of recruits and recruiting, but they're still not there yet. They're still, they haven't passed Ohio State in recruiting in any of these years. They're just getting closer. So you're starting behind and you're not quite getting closer in a year. So, they are closer than most teams in the Big Ten in terms of depth to Ohio State, but I don't think they're there yet. And I think that is something that you could see play out in the fourth quarter again on Saturday.
I'm with you. Are you ready to get to listener questions?
I am. The first one is from Tony G. No, that's too obvious. Let's go with T. Gerdeman. Which Buckeye is most likely to record a pick six in this game?
I'll let you go first, Tom.
This is, of course, if you're new to college football, this is a hallowed tradition in Ohio State, Penn State history. Penn State known as Pick Six University because Ohio State has had defensive backs run back. It's been a few years now, but there was a long string of seasons when Ohio State would pick off a pass and run back a pick six just about every year. So I think the last time we talked about the next player to score a defensive touchdown, I went with Jordan Fuller. So I'll go with him again, just on the thought that McSorley is going to heave one up, and Fuller's the kind of guy who might be out kind of playing a center field role and be able to cut over and pick it off. And, with a cornerback, a lot of times, unless you're jumping an out route or something like that, that receiver is going to tackle you as often as not. If you're the safety, maybe that's a little less likely. You can get yourself to the sideline, get down that sideline and score. So I'll go with Jordan Fuller. How about you?
Then I will go with Malik Harrison, dropping back and McSorley not seeing him, and he'll catch it, and then everybody turns into a blocker, and they take him down the sideline for about 36 yards. And the linebacker pick six is not unprecedented in this series because Ryan Shazier had one. So I'll go with Malik Harrison to make it 2. And I don't feel like it's an impossibility.
If that does happen, just promise me you'll interview him post game and ask about the lack of tackles last week. You know, I know you had a pick six this week, but Tulane, what was up with that? Next question from Asante. It's a long one. Is recruiting in the state up north starting to see deep changes because of Ohio State's success coupled with the Wolverines' decline? Anecdotally, I recently read about a recruit from Michigan saying he actually followed Ohio State and Sparty more than the Wolverines. That got me to thinking, since these kids are not old enough to remember anything other than Wolverine mediocrity and Ohio State's dominance in the series, that the recruiting path to Ohio is a lot easier up there now. Even Sparty is seen as more competitive and successful to them. Residual Trestle effect? Wondered if it is a reciprocal to some of the success UM had in Ohio in the 1990s and early 2000s.
You know, interestingly, Residual Trestle effect is my band's name. We're a slow down jazz group. We don't, we like to take it easy. But come see us sometime. We don't do requests. We just like to do it our way. And just, we just keep going on. But yeah, it's obviously there's the whole Trestle thing that, we talked about this back when we were reviewing the Amazon All or Nothing show, the All or Nothing Michigan show, where the recruits now don't understand what Michigan, I guess used to be, even though when Michigan, quote unquote, used to be something, they were still 9-3, so the Michigan lore, what we've seen over the last, say, 18 years, 15, well, it wouldn't even be 18, the last 10, 12 years, that recruits now would even be paying attention. Not that, it doesn't even go back that far, but, the lack of success against Ohio State, the lack of success against Michigan State, the Wolverines need offensive line help. There are 5-star offensive linemen in the state of Michigan who are not even looking at Michigan. So there's all kinds of, reasons why Michigan is not doing well, but mainly it's because, kids, Michigan is a name, but that name, the kids don't see the results necessarily that I guess would be commensurate to that name. And then you watch All or Nothing, and this is supposed to be a sales pitch, basically. And Tom, there's nothing about it that made me want to buy it. And I just think for recruits right now, it's tough to recruit in the state of Michigan because it's not quite the draw it was. And, it takes a unique player to want to go there. Now, players still do want to go there, and they just, signed one of the top safeties, or not signed, but got a commitment from one of the top safeties in the nation. But I also think Jim Harbaugh could be doing a better job of casting a wider net with smaller holes or bigger holes to catch bigger fish and leave the smaller fish to go. Because the 3-star buffet that he's got going on, I know he loves to develop players and convince people that he can turn them all into Michigan men, but it's a lot easier if you just go ahead and sign better players right out of the gate.
Right. I mean, Michigan has signed some 5-star players recently. I mean, you've got Jabril Peppers, you've got Rashawn Gary, they've got the defensive end out of Georgia Hinton in this class, you've got Daxton Hill, the safety just mentioned out of Oklahoma, who just committed to Michigan. I didn't see any Michigan blogs openly speculating on why a player would choose Michigan over Alabama. Usually they have school acronyms with dollar signs in them when that happens. I didn't see that, which is weird. Maybe they forgot to speculate on that this time. Really, though, the difference between the Ohio State classes and the Michigan classes recently is in the 4 stars. It's in the depth, because Michigan has had those 5-star players. They've had, like we said, Gary Peppers, Daxton Hill, Chris Hinton. I mean, assuming
Shane Morris.
Shane, you're mean. You're really mean. They have had some of those top level players, and I mean, a lot of those were a result of Michigan hiring a high school coach from New Jersey who coached those players, and then bringing those players with him. But where you see the difference is in the 4 stars. I mean, Ohio State is signing classes of 20, 25 guys, and you have a couple 5 stars, just like Michigan has a couple 5 stars in this upcoming class. But then you have like 24-star kids. and you have some 3-stars. You are going to take some camp prospects and some, under the radar guys like that. That's going to happen. But Michigan is signing like 15 of those 3-star players. Ohio State is signing like 3 of them. So that's where the depth comes in. That's where the, that's the stuff that adds up. Because over the course of 4 years, that's half your roster that you're, that is 4-star players who are, there's no guarantee in recruiting, but there is a decent correlation between, your recruiting ranking in terms of star rating and your likelihood to be an All-American, your likelihood to be an All-Conference player, your likelihood to be a first-round NFL draft pick. I mean, there are correlations there for all of them. I mean, everyone has their little anecdotal, A.J. Hawk was better than Mike DeAndrea, and Mike DeAndrea was a 5-star. I mean, you can cherry pick examples that are kind of counterfactuals, but on the whole, I mean, this seems so absurd that I have to say this out loud, but on the whole, you're better off recruiting better players. That's, I mean, go ahead.
Hold on, let me write this down.
I'll give you a moment to write that down. But if you are consistently recruiting higher ranked players, as Ohio State has been, compared to everyone else in the Big Ten for more than a decade now, it adds up and you get consistent. That's where consistent dominance comes from, consistently recruiting better players. So, I mean, Michigan certainly has some issues, and the fact that the kids they're recruiting now, if you're in 12th grade this year, you were in kindergarten in 2006, so, and you were, I'm sure, not paying attention. So, when these kids started probably paying attention to football in, I don't know, what's the earliest football you really remember, third grade, fourth grade, really watching like seasons and really caring deeply about football?
Even later than that for me. And, I remember like Carlos Snow and like Keith Byers I really have very little memory of Keith Byers, John Woolridge. And I would have been 10 in 86. So, some memories, one memory that I do have, I don't know if it's real, is a Jim Carsano skip pass to Chris Carter. Would have been a lateral, but it bounced off the turf. I don't know if that actually happened or it's just a memory that, was implanted somehow. I don't know why that would be planted there, but, fleeting memories of old timey football.
History's lamest fever dream, the Jim Carsano skip pass. Yeah. I mean, you gotta remember, like, this is one of these things that just is going to make you feel impossibly old. But players now, when you talk to players, they talk about growing up watching Terrell Pryor play. And it's like, when I was a kid and Terrell Pryor was at Ohio State, and, I just immediately reach for my AARP card. Just like, how are my 9 million years old all of a sudden? But, I mean, the kids who are recruits now, if they were football fans very, very, very early, they remember the Rich Rodriguez era. But for the most part, it's Brady Hoke and Jim Harbaugh, and Michigan has been very extremely blah for that entire time. No one now has any real memory of the 1-2 Ohio State Michigan game in 2006. Nobody who's a recruit right now has any real lasting memory of that game. So they're in a very difficult position because they're in a state that is losing population. I mean, that's the broader geographical trends in the region are hitting them hard, and they've been bad long enough that they don't, you can show people Desmond Howard and Charles Woodson, but that all happened before any of these kids were born. So that was going to resonate with people as much as showing them Archie Griffin or Eddie George. I mean, it's just, no one remembers that stuff at this point. So
yeah, like Mike Hart is the running backs coach at Indiana. His players don't, from 2004 to 2007, they're, maybe the seniors have a recollection that, oh yeah, I know you played, but for them to have seen him, he would have to show them, or they'd have to go look on YouTube now.
Yeah. So TLDR, Michigan is maybe in trouble. So next question from Mobuck. When, if ever this season, does Jeremy Ruckert become a part of this offense?
Next season. Maybe. There's no room right now.
Yeah, there's no room, and I mean, the answer with every tight end is when he blocks well enough. That's the next. That's the actual answer. So, I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's this year, but they seem like they've got a couple tight ends that they're reasonably happy with. Luke Farrell and Rashad Berry. They have so many other weapons in the passing game that I don't think that they need to use Ruckert right now as a receiver. I mean, we've talked about them splitting him out and using him in the passing game, but you have so many other weapons in the passing game. I don't think you have to. So they may just try and redshirt him, and because there's no real need to play him this year unless you have a couple injuries there. So I would not expect to see him for any meaningful amount of time this season.
Next year they do. I mean, you lose the 3 senior receivers. You probably lose KJ Hill. So they're not going to be as deep at receiver, even though they're going to have some really good guys. But maybe next year there's more of an opportunity for the tight ends. But even still, he's going to have to move ahead of Luke Farrell or Rashad Berry to be in that discussion.
And I mean, there's probably a place for him because neither of those guys has really shined as a receiver. And Ruckert, I mean, at least in his high school film, has shown the ability to be a legitimate threat in the passing game. So maybe there is a role for him, but for there to be a role for him next year, he's got to be a good blocker. If you can't block, you can't play. That's kind of rule number 1 in the Ohio State offense. Next question from Buck the World. In honor of the linebackers, which non-starters deserve more playing time?
I don't have a good answer for this because I don't know. My first thought would be Sean Wade, but he's playing a lot. He's the nickelback, so they're in the nickel quite a bit. So he's playing. Tate Martell, should he play more? I don't know that he's going to play this week unless things get comfortable. Should he play more? Not in place of what Dwayne Haskins can do in a big game. So I don't really have any good, unless we, talk about a linebacker. I wouldn't mind seeing Baron Browning play more just so he can continue to build that confidence. But he's also, he's playing quite a bit in his role. But I don't know. I don't really have a great answer here, Tom. What about you?
Sean Wade was the first person I thought of. So Dante Booker graded out a champion last week. So, maybe him. If you're not happy with any of the other linebackers and Dante Booker graded out well, maybe him. But I don't. There are not very many spots where there are issues right now that I think, you need to look at replacing someone or dialing back someone's playing time. I would go with Wade as my first choice, but if that's not an answer, then yeah, I guess Dante Booker. But that's a 1-game sample, mostly in the second half against a terrible opponent. So I don't know quite how much stock to put in that.
Well, and he would have a good game here and a bad game here last year, and where I think he was a player of the game in one of the games last year too, but then he still disappears or is dinged up, loses his job or whatever. So yeah, you just don't know what to expect from game to game, and it's not just him. It's right now it's all of the linebackers.
All right. Next question from @BurnerAccount69. The Penn State game always seems to have something weird happen, like a big special teams play or defensive touchdowns. Are you anticipating weirdness? If so, how weird are we going to get on Saturday night?
I don't plan on getting very weird on Saturday night because it's a work environment. But I mean, there's going to be something. What you don't want it to have happen if you're Ohio State is for another blocked kick or blocked punt, because that's usually bad news in terms of the win-loss record. When Ohio State blocks a punt, they generally win. So if they can get one of those, or some random like the TCU kick return, maybe Penn State tries that, or something. It's not just going to be Tom. It's not just going to be a normal run-of-the-mill paint by numbers game. Something odd is going to happen. You just have to hope it's not what costs you the game.
Yeah, this is the kind of game where teams are saving something for this game. They're going to break out something different, whether it's a crazy trick play or a punt block that they haven't really shown before, or a weird an onside kick in an unexpected time in the third quarter or something like that. I mean, I would anticipate weirdness just based on that. But yeah, I mean, we talked about this a little bit earlier. That is the one thing that I think would swing the game from Ohio State is more likely to win it to Ohio State is more likely to lose it, is some kind of real dumb something in the kicking game, whether it's a blocked field goal or a blocked punt or, someone muffing a punt, something like that. And Ohio State has shown a little bit of a vulnerability in some of those areas this year. So Tulane seemed like they got kind of close to a punt last week. So I'd be a little nervous about that. It's just if you're looking for something to worry about, and Lord knows that you are, then that's, I think, one thing that you could look at as a potential concern going into Saturday.
Well, that's like last year with the linebacker Koa Farmer, the Penn State linebacker, returning a kickoff like 70 yards, on a pooch kick or a squib. I think it was a squib, rather than kick it to Saquon Barkley, who returned the opening kick for the touchdown. They squibbed it, and Koa Farmer, a linebacker, decent speed, I guess, returned it 65 or 70 yards. So just weird, stupid stuff like that. Yeah, look for it, I guess. Just hope it doesn't cost you your team's victory.
All right, next question from @BuckeyeTie23. Which defense has more pressure to perform Saturday? In other words, which offense is more capable of winning a potential shootout?
You were talking about Penn State's defense and their struggles, and I was thinking, like, the fans, like the Ohio State fans are worried about their defense, and you said Penn State fans are worried about their defense as well. So it's like, the animal is more scared of you than you are of it. Like, I think, like, Penn State fans are more scared of Ohio State's offense than maybe Ohio State fans are scared of Penn State's offense. But there's reason for fear from both. But I think Penn State fans should be more concerned about their defense because, as I said earlier in the show, and I told you, after interviews today or before interviews, I'll take Ohio State in a shootout against just about anybody in the country, and I don't even know who I wouldn't. Obviously Tua is everything they say he is apparently, but against Penn State, yeah, I'll go ahead and take Ohio State in that shootout. And Ohio State's tempo should wear Penn State's defense down. Ohio State being able to rotate on defense helps them, and I don't know that Penn State is going to run the same tempo to try to wear them down.
Yeah, I would say Ohio State's passing game is better than Penn State's passing game. The running games are probably kind of similar. Penn State's statistically been better this year, but Ohio State, I would not bet against J.K. Dobbins or Mike Weber having a 150-yard game, one of them, or 125-yard game, something like that on Saturday. So, and then on the defense, Ohio State's defense is probably a little better than Penn State's. Both of them are kind of question marks this year. I do think if Ohio State loses, it's going to be something dumb on special teams that does it. So, last question from Brutus Buckeye 13. Has Nick Bosa played his last game as a Buckeye? If so, should I be drowning my sorrows, or is there anything you can say to talk me off the ledge?
Urban Meyer says that Nick Bosa wants to return. What I will say, though, is that the family is still talking about what to do. So I don't, if a decision has been made, I don't think a decision has been made because they still have to get reevaluated and then talk it out. And there is the very real possibility that he won't return to the football team. Urban Meyer said he expects him to, but that was the only answer Meyer was going to give. He wasn't going to say, well, I don't know. He's obviously going to put nothing but good vibes out there and show that they want Nick Bosa back, which they obviously do. Tom, I don't think we can answer one way or the other because the family still has to talk about it, really talk about it once they have all of the information.
Right. I think, the absolute earliest you could possibly see him is for maybe the Nebraska game, which is the week after the bye. And, it is far from a guarantee that you're going to see him again. It would not surprise me if he wanted to play and decided he wanted to play. This is, there are a whole lot of different factors that go into this decision. And, I mean, this is not a family that is, the parents live in a bad neighborhood and he's going to buy his parents a new house when he gets his first NFL contract because his dad was a first-round NFL draft pick. His brother is currently an NFL star. So, this is not as make or break as decision as it is probably for some other players. But, I don't think you could really fault him if he was kind of iffy, if he decided, yeah, I'm just going to play it safe and not come back this year. But I don't think that decision has been made by any means right now. And, you have to have at least more than a month of healing at this point. And, there's a lot of stuff that can heal quickly, that can heal slowly. And you never really know until they go in and look at it and figure out, if he is close to 100%, I do probably expect him to come back, but who knows? We still don't know exactly what the procedure was and exactly what the timetable of recovery is, and exactly, Urban Meyer has said Tough Borland is a quick healer. Is Nick Bosa a quick healer? I don't know. We don't know that. I mean, there's so many variables here that we don't know. So, I would not say at this point that I think we have seen Nick Bosa play his last game at Ohio State, but if that was the case, it wouldn't completely shock me.
Nope, I'm with you. That's actually going to do it for this episode. I want to thank you all for listening. What we would also like to ask you is rate us and review us on iTunes. That helps us get seen. Eventually, we're going to work out something where we send out some copies of the Trilogy, the 2014 book on that championship run. And I do know that I still owe somebody a book out there, and I have your address, and I promise I will get that out. But yeah, we'll work something out where, if you rate and review, we'll do some sort of contest and pick your name out of something or other and get some books sent out for helping us. And you're already helping us by listening, and we thank you for that. Make sure to check out the rest of the shows on the Ozone Radio Network, which would be the Buckeye Sloopcast on Monday, Silver Bullets Podcast on Tuesday, us on Wednesday, Sons of Schmidt on Thursday, the next episode of the Sloopcast on Friday, and then you've got us right after the game, give or take 5 or 6 hours. Unless I go and have some beers, then it's like we have some beers, and then it's like 7 or 8 hours. But Sunday morning it's there for you. And we appreciate you for downloading each and every episode, listening to each and every episode. And your feedback is always welcome. And we will talk to you next from beautiful Happy Valley. Tom, is this going to be your first time at Penn State?
I have been to Penn State once before. I was there for the 2003 game, which was about the least memorable Ohio State-Penn State game in the 25 years that they've been playing since Penn State joined the conference. Penn State was awful. It was right at the end of a, 4-8 kind of season for them, 5-7 season. The stadium was kind of half full of Ohio State fans, and I'm anticipating a different environment Saturday night, put it that way.
Well, we'll see. Anyway, we will talk to you from there Saturday afternoon sometime. We will see you then. Thanks for listening.
Well, she threw